The Ukrainian army is taking critical steps these days on the battlefield to change the 12-year occupation landscape. The entire picture is now shifting in the southern corridor leading to Crimea. Momentum is turning in Ukraine's favor in Mariupol, Berdyansk, Melitopol, and Kherson. Nearly all land bridges between the southern front lines and the Crimean Peninsula have been taken out one by one. As we also described in our video about the latest strikes that disabled a full 6 bridges in the region, we are facing a historic scene. The countdown has now begun for the Russian army. Every exit route is being closed off one by one. Putin's soldiers can no longer look confidently toward either Crimea or any other southern front. Ukrainian units continue to maintain continuous fire control over the lines in both directions from 100 to 160 kilometers away. Any Russian military convoy attempting to pass through these routes is now being targeted far more easily and quickly. In total, approximately 150,000 Russian soldiers are reported to have fallen into a major logistical deadlock across the southern Ukrainian fronts. This enormous mass of troops has been effectively trapped in the south, directly and indirectly affected by all these ongoing operations. Military support and basic logistical supplies are no longer reaching the Russian soldiers properly. For the first time in a long while, the Ukrainian armed forces have managed to get this close to Crimea from the south. The Kiev administration is preparing its final move to further corner this southern Russian force that exceeds 100,000 troops. Putin's soldiers on the ground have now clearly realized this changing reality in all its nakedness. After each closing escape route, they are desperately trying to find one last remaining exit. The identities and positions of these Russian units trapped in the south and frantically searching for escape routes are quite clear. In the region, elements attached to the Russian 5th Combined Arms Army are particularly prominent in the forward lines. In addition to this critical unit, Spetsnaz elements redeployed from the Eastern Military District are also trying to hold defensive lines in the same narrow area. The accompanying units of the 58th Army are likewise trapped inside this same logistical encirclement. Russian naval infantry, special forces, and the recently mobilized personnel thrown into the front are also part of this grim picture. A large portion of these units are pinned down west of the strategically important Huliaipol and Orikhiv. As military analyst Taras Zagorodny has also pointed out, keeping hundreds of thousands of personnel combat-ready in such geography requires enormous mathematical planning. Given the arid steppe structure of the region, each soldier at the front needs a minimum of 3 liters of clean drinking water per day. This simple calculation alone clearly shows that the 150,000-strong army in the south must transport approximately 500,000 liters of water to the front every single day just to stay alive. When you add the tons of diesel fuel consumed by armored brigades, the ammunition for artillery batteries, and the food rations needed to meet daily caloric requirements, the scale of the logistical nightmare becomes even clearer. Additionally, Russian forces clinging to the left bank of Kherson are sharing the same fate, cut off from the mainland. These soldiers are also trapped due to Putin's stubborn insistence on occupation, left waiting without proper military logistics. Facing all these Russian units on the southern front lines is a highly organized, motivated, and determined Ukrainian military force. Under the command of General Syrsky, the Ukrainian armed forces are systematically and continuously increasing pressure on the enemy in the area. The Southern Defense Forces, along with experienced mechanized brigades and Azov units, are extremely active on the ground. In particular, strike forces integrated with unmanned systems are constantly testing weak points and command centers deep in the Russian lines. Moreover, cutting-edge drone units such as the Ukrainian Unmanned Systems Forces create an uninterrupted threat from the sky. Kiev's medium and long-range drone operations and airstrikes continue without pause in the region. In addition, coordinated ground attacks by Ukrainian mechanized units are straining the Russian defensive lines. When all these pressure elements combine, the Russian army's chances of safely escaping this narrow area are slowly beginning to run out. Kiev is carefully monitoring every geographical point from which support could reach the Russian forces in the south. Ukrainian forces are essentially standing 24/7 watch on every road, highway, and secondary artery carrying military ammunition. Russian military vehicle has now become a target. Yet despite this tight surveillance and high risk, Russian staff officers continue their stubborn approach. They are still making desperate attempts to deliver vital ammunition and resources to their soldiers in the south. The Moscow command echelon is forced to approve high-risk logistical infiltration operations to prevent the complete collapse of battalions on the front lines. The most striking and recent example of this occurred on June 11th on the strategically critical Armyansk route. Ukraine's continuous fire control over the Mariupol and Berdyansk highways in the southeast had already disrupted Russian generals' supply plans. Unable to use the southeast corridor, Russian logistical units turned to dangerous pontoon crossings and alternative dirt roads extending north from Crimea. The Russians attempted a support operation with a massive 50-vehicle military convoy. A significant portion of the military cargo trucks was also loaded with dry food rations prepared for the 58th Army soldiers in the trenches and high-octane military diesel needed for tank maneuverability. The main reason was the heavy damage sustained by the Chongar Bridge, one of the primary connections between Kherson and Crimea. Once the bridge was closed to traffic, Russian logistical units had no choice but to redirect the cargo trucks via Armyansk. Ukrainian pressure on the Mariupol and Berdyansk axes was another key factor pushing the Russians toward this northwest route. However, Kiev's technological superiority and field intelligence network never allowed this covert move. Ukrainian tactical reconnaissance drones tracked the convoy's departure from the assembly point near Armyansk step by step and relayed positional data in real time to fire support elements. The legendary 1st Separate Assault Regiment, under the command of Dmytro Perun Filatov, immediately detected this massive convoy. Coordinating with other unmanned aerial vehicle units, this regiment successfully engaged the convoy near Armyansk. Ukrainian media sources reported that a significant portion of the heavy tonnage vehicles carrying fuel and ammunition were disabled in the operation. Simultaneous dives by medium-range kamikaze drones caused diesel-loaded tankers to explode one after another, completely paralyzing the entire supply line. This strike north of Crimea proved to the Russian army that the situation had become irreversible. Following this, Russian staff officers were forced to acknowledge that the main supply routes had been effectively and completely closed. The logistical support urgently needed by the troops at the front had turned to ash on the roads before it could reach its destination. After this successful interdiction operation, Russian front commanders were driven into an unsolvable dilemma: rationing depleted ammunition more carefully and seeking new supply alternatives. Kiev was aware of the success it had achieved, because these precision operations were only one part of Ukraine's months-long meticulous attrition strategy. The southern land corridor, the M14, M17, and M18 highways, has now ceased to be a safe transit point for Russia. Military experts note that military traffic in this corridor has dropped by 70% due to the threat created by unmanned aerial vehicles. This collapse in logistical lines has led to the inability to meet even the daily basic needs of many Russian soldiers fighting at the front. Soldiers whose morale and motivation are steadily weakening are experiencing serious operational vulnerabilities. Civilian and military authorities in Crimea have announced that they have been forced to implement a fuel rationing system due to this crisis. This structural breakdown in the supply chain has left the military administration in the region facing a new crisis, managing the growing discontent of both civilians and soldiers. Food supply, access to clean water, and ammunition resupply have now become enormous problems for Russia. This physical deprivation naturally creates a deep psychological collapse among the soldiers fighting at the front. The soldiers in the south now know very well that no reliable support line remains that can reach them from the rear. Ukraine's successful logistical blockade is breaking Russian resistance on the southern front more and more each day. So what happens now? Following all these successful operations by the Ukrainian army and the logistical collapse of Russian forces in the south, Kiev has gradually begun turning its target toward Crimea. Because the increasing cornering of the Russian army in the south is also causing the defense garrisons in Crimea to become ineffective day by day. The main units defending the peninsula have now shifted from planning offensives to a doctrine of merely holding their existing positions. Ukraine aims to transform the peninsula from a mere logistical base into a defenseless target as well. The main focus is the primary logistical artery in Crimea. Just as it struck the southern land bridges with great precision, attention has now turned to the massive Kerch Bridge. The Kiev administration has more than enough potential to target the Kerch Bridge again in order to completely win the logistical war. Moreover, after the operational process that has passed, the bridge's current vulnerability to Ukrainian attacks can be analyzed much more clearly by intelligence units. As you will recall, we witnessed this bridge being struck by a truck bomb in 2022, sea drones in 2023, and underwater explosives in 2025. A new strike in 2026 is not impossible. Vladimir Putin probably knows very well the reality that this possible operation is constantly appearing on the horizon. For this reason, Russian authorities have essentially declared a mobilization in military and engineering terms to protect the Kerch Bridge. The bridge's security has been built upon a multi-layered, complex and extremely costly defense strategy. In the outermost protection layer are long-range S-400 Triumph air defense systems that scan a wide area. These advanced radar systems are kept continuously active to detect threats heading toward the bridge from many kilometers away. Pantsir S-1 and S-1M systems have been meticulously placed directly on the bridge and near its critical points. One important detail that has drawn the attention of military observers is that these Pantsir systems deployed to the bridge have special armored cabins and camouflage originally designed for desert climates. The primary task of these systems is to provide close-range air defense against drones that manage to penetrate long-range missiles. This air shield, woven with short-range defense networks, has been architected entirely to prevent target saturation. However, the Russian defense setup is not limited to the sky and aerial threats. On the sea surface and at the bridge's critical underwater supports, very tight physical barriers have also been constructed. Massive barges have been chained parallel at the bridge's approach points, deliberately narrowing the channel entrances. Mobile barge systems supported by tugboats, capable of quickly positioning to completely close passages under the bridge in emergency operational situations, have been activated. Durable nets and buoyed barriers, specially drawn into the sea, have been added. Reinforced with metal spikes and underwater obstacles, these nets aim to detonate any autonomous vehicle attempting to infiltrate from the surface before it can reach the bridge supports. The main purpose of these barriers is to physically slow down and stop Ukraine's high-explosive unmanned surface vessels. High-speed boats belonging to the FSB and the Russian Navy, continuously patrolling the area, are also an active part of this naval defense. In particular, Grachanok and Sobol-class military patrol boats circle the barriers 24 hours a day, monitoring possible infiltration attempts. Even massive smoke generators stand ready to mislead missile guidance systems and disrupt targeting. It appears that Moscow is using all its military and technological capabilities to protect the Kerch Bridge, a structure of strategic importance. Yet the Ukrainian army's continuously evolving tactics have the potential to overcome this multi-layered protective shield. If Kiev decides to press the button to deliver the final blow, it can successfully carry out its fourth attack on the Kerch Bridge, just as in the past. For this, a complex attack plan using simultaneous multi-layered swarms of unmanned aerial and naval vehicles could be put into action. According to military expert Oleksandr Kovalenko's analysis, tactical drones with 150 to 200 kilometer range, such as RAV-2X, Bulava and Hornet, could play a key role in the operation. When hundreds of drones are sent toward the target simultaneously from different directions, air defense systems exceed their capacity due to target saturation. Cheap, attention-diverting unmanned vehicles sent in the first wave deplete the Pantsir system's ammunition and weaken them. Asymmetric tactics, such as carrying the unmanned vehicles to a certain distance with stratospheric balloons and then releasing them, could also be employed to increase operational secrecy and drone flight range. The real strike wave that follows would have the potential to blind S-400 batteries and disable radar systems. Simultaneously, Magura and Sea Baby type unmanned surface vehicles advancing rapidly from the sea surface could tear apart the defense networks. The barges and chains established as physical barriers could lose function through successive explosions. Long-range scenarios supported by British-made Storm Shadow or domestically produced Neptune missiles are also likely on Kyiv's table. Unmanned underwater vehicles that could be directed from submarine platforms or diver teams could be deployed to silently bypass Russian sensors and reach the bridge's main load-bearing columns. If Ukraine implements one of these plans and strikes Kerch, the Russian army's situation will truly become untenable. Putin's plans to win the war on his own terms in this difficult scenario could completely fall apart. Because the Kerch Bridge no longer carries only prestigious and symbolic value. It stands as almost the sole remaining lifeline for the Russian army, whose logistical lines have collapsed and which is being squeezed from the south to stay operational. The alternative sea ferries and pontoon crossings considered are extremely insufficient for large-scale military logistics. The variable climate and harsh winds of the Black Sea limit the reliability of established pontoon bridges and ferry services to just a few days. All other transportation routes and land bridges are blocked under Ukrainian technological fire control. If Russia loses this bridge at such a critical juncture, the fate of the war could truly change to a great extent. According to modern military doctrines, the combat capability of a conventional unit whose logistical arteries have been completely severed erodes within a very short time. The 150,000-strong army trapped in the south will be left completely isolated to face its own fate. This strategic isolation could bring about a far more chaotic withdrawal scenario, similar to the Kherson process at the end of 2022, but on a much larger scale. In conclusion, this silent but deeply advancing logistical war that has continued on the ground for months is a reflection of Ukraine's patient strategy. In the dynamic and constantly changing southern front, psychological and tactical superiority now rests in the hands of the Kyiv administration. Ukraine's innovative use of medium-range drone technology has succeeded in paralyzing classical Russian war doctrine and logistical networks. The Crimean Peninsula is no longer an unshakable fortress, but is step-by-step turning into an isolated open target. The reality that modern wars are won not by the number of soldiers in the field, but by the resilience of the supply chains that feed those armies, is once again proven today on the southern front. The critical period ahead may witness the days when the fate of the Kerch Bridge will be decided, and the direction of the war will be completely redrawn. So, what do you think about this? Could Ukraine's possible fourth major move against the Kerch Bridge permanently break the Russian resistance on the southern front? How much longer can a 150,000-strong army, completely cut off from supply routes and unable to receive reinforcements, sustain its presence in the field against this smart technological siege by Ukraine? We look forward to your comments. To make long journeys more enjoyable, we also invite you to Spotify, where we offer our video content. Thank you for choosing us. Presented by TGN.